Welcome back to Outdoor Exploration. I'm Emily. This is our sequoia tree. I am going to do an episode today about tree identification, and mostly I'm going to show you trees that are indigenous here or somewhere nearby the coast of British Columbia. I'm starting on my property where my parents, my father mostly has collected a lot, I couldn't tell you how many, of different species of trees and hundreds of species of rhodos from around, the rhodos are from all over the world, but the trees are mostly from BC with some exceptions. And I'm starting with this one because this is a sequoia which they brought here when I was young. I'm not sure how old, but it's approximately as old as I am. So that's interesting. It's rather larger. If you look up, you can see they've taken off some of the limbs just so it's not lying all over the ground here, but it has somewhat cedar-like qualities while having leaves instead of those needles instead of those scaly leaves like cedars do, and a rather different bark, which is kind of it's almost spongy. It's hard to explain, but it feels spongy to me. So, yeah, that's a sequoia, and they are not native to Bowen Island where I am, or even the BC coast. They're native in Oregon and California. So that's this is not actually from here, but they do grow here, and I've seen a few others. So that's the sequoia. Let's see what else we can look at today. Okay, so I thought the next likely thing to show you would be a cedar. This is actually in the area of our property that my parents didn't clear very much back in the day. So all of this used to be forest, and a lot of it was cedar and hemlock and fir. So this is a cedar. You can recognize cedars sometimes by the fact that they buttress out at the bottom, and that they have this stripy bark. They're one of the few trees that the bark actually looks quite similar when they're older. Like this one's not terribly old, but older than when they're really young. It still looks stripy like that. Another thing that makes them super obvious to recognize are these scaly leaves that they have. They really don't look like the other conifers. Most of conifers are like a branch with needles that come off, right? Or a twig. This is, I don't know, a twig with flat scaly needles that come off. So yeah, you can actually use cedar for tea and various things. I mean, as we know, indigenous people here used it for all kinds of things, including clothing and building and everything. So it has a lot of uses, but it's also rather precious. So luckily we still have a bunch of them around here. They are apparently dying off as climate change happens and things are drying out. Cedars require a lot of water, and as it gets drier and drier here, we have fewer and fewer cedars, unfortunately. So that's cedars. And I am just going to walk right around here right now and show you some young hemlocks that were right behind you a second ago. So these are quite young, growing on an old cedar stump and around it. So this is a nurse stump, and this is an example of a tree that has slightly different bark when it's younger. So when they're quite young, they have this sort of stripy bark, and as they get older, it becomes more flaky like that. Oops, excuse me, these are all the dead branches. And we have quite a lot of hemlock forests around here that are full of tiny trees, so you'll find these really branchy little forests. But other than these little dead branchy forests, one way to recognize them is to look at the needles. And so these do have needles, but unlike fir trees and things like that, they have differently sized needles. So mostly the longer needles are at the sides, and then they have little short needles that stick up along the top. I think they look kind of messy, so yeah. And you can see on this one, there are all these tiny, tiny little green tips that are beginning, and those are the new needles. So you can make actually needle tea out of hemlock tips. When they're bigger, obviously these are so tiny. In a week or two, maybe 3, they'll be big enough to pick, and then you can pick hemlock tips and make tea out of those and dry them if you want to store them. I am going to take you down the hill now and show you an older hemlock. And if you keep in mind, hopefully you can see through these branches, that more scaly looking bark that it gets as it gets older. The bigger tree that I'll take you to right now has more of that and probably none of this left. So let's go down the hill here. All right, so here is an older hemlock. As you can see, it has the same needles. There are more healthy needles hanging lower down than there were on those others, because those were all kind of growing up through the darkness to reach the light. This one has a lot of its surrounding trees cut down, so it has all the light at once, and it's making more needles lower down. But you can see the bark is now looking quite, it's not scaly anymore so much as, I don't know what you would call it, ridgy maybe? I don't know. And in fact, it looks ever so slightly similar to maple bark, which is completely unrelated, so very different from a hemlock tree. Follow me and turn around, there's a maple tree right on this side. So from a distance, some people sometimes think hemlock trunks are the same as maple trunks. They're actually not at all. And you can see the maple pieces actually kind of curl off a little bit. Maples often have moss on them. They often have licorice ferns, although I don't see any up there on this one. But yeah, so this is a big leaf maple, which has much bigger leaves than these up there, and especially later in the year. But yeah, I think most of us know how to recognize those. But if you're looking at the bark, don't accidentally mistake maple and hemlock bark, or whatever, confuse them. What else shall we look at? How about Douglas fir? So next in my lineup of conifers is the Douglas fir. This is a very, very tiny Douglas fir, and as you can see, it has its new needles. So just like that hemlock that I mentioned was getting those teeny weeny little sprouts, these Douglas fir actually get something like this, which is a little brown shiny sort of a bud, and then out of this pop all the needles, and then they grow and they'll get a little longer than this even. You can also eat them and make tea out of them, and every year it gets more as it grows. So I'm going to show you some Douglas firs in different stages of life. Follow me. So next there's this one, which similarly to the hemlock has a different bark than you will see on the adults. Has sort of lines. Oh, there's a nest of ants coming up here, and it also has little bumps on it. And as you can see up here, the leaves, the new needles are also coming out. This one, you can still see those orange papery casings I was talking about that they emerge from. The most obvious way to recognize fir boughs or whatever needles is because they're all the same length. So you see, they're not all flat. Some of them stick up and some of them stick down, but they're all the same length. These will be when they're older. So as opposed to hemlocks, which have all differently length needles, and also as opposed to grand fir, which hopefully we'll find to show you today, but they actually have all the same length needles, but they're very flat, meaning all on one plane. But this Douglas fir, and yeah, so I don't know how old this one is, maybe 10 years something, I don't know. And if you follow me, or at least pan the camera, because I'm not sure how I'll get to it, we have an older one up here, over there. Now, I remember this tree when I was younger. It was about the size of the one I just showed you. So it's a few decades, I'm guessing. And it's hard to see much of it right now, but you can see that the bark is changing. So now it's getting all this sort of crumbly looking bark. And yeah, that is an older Douglas fir. So that huge tree back there is one of our biggest Douglas firs on the property, which my father informs me is probably about 600 or 700 years old. And yeah, rather big. You can see the top has broken out of it, so it used to be bigger than that, but apparently that's how they end their life. They slowly lose their top again and again and again as they crumble slowly, which I suppose is good instead of falling all at once. It's our big, gigantic Douglas fir. So behind these salal here, you can see this little tiny lodgepole pine sticking up, which my father apparently brought from Tatleoka Lake. It also has new needles coming. I don't know if you can see this tiny little bunch here, and then here whole clusters of new needles. And over here, if I get along through all the salal, is a somewhat larger, also young, lodgepole pine again. So this has, here the branches, also getting new needles here. Some little tiny cones you can see there. So, oh, this one I believe is from Murray Lake, I think he told me. Also in BC. So this is a yew tree. They're quite often small and scrubby looking. This one has been here, I think, most of my life, at least as long as I can remember. And yews, let me see, I can show you on these needles here. They have similarly sized needles. They're not as scrappy looking as hemlock in terms of the size of the needles, but the needles aren't all as evenly arranged as fir needles, and they're also kind of wider and flatter individually, each needle that is, I mean. And if you look closely at the bark, they have this kind of flaky bark. Now, spruce also have flaky bark, which we'll get to later, but it's a little different than this. This is these thin flakes, and quite often they have, they're just smaller, kind of thinner trees. They are also one of the very few poisonous trees that we have. Yew berries, they get these berries in the fall, actually could kill you if you ate a lot of them. So I wouldn't advise it. Yew is also known as boxwood, so those little boxwood hedges that people have, those are yew. They're also poisonous, so obviously it's nothing to be afraid of. I mean, we have them all through our city parks. But yeah, you don't eat the berries, that's for sure. That's the yew. Y-E-W, not Y-O-U. So, I don't want to make this video too long, but I would like to include a few of the flowering trees that we have right now. One of these is the mountain ash. Some people call it a rowan, but here, mostly I think it's called a mountain ash. And you can see the white flowers on it. In the fall, it gets red berries. Quite often, woodpeckers are there eating it. And in fact, it gets pecked around by sapsuckers also quite often. They have a kind of spray of leaves so there'll be a branch with leaves on both sides going out, which is sort of an easy thing to recognize it by. I'll show you up close. So here are some young leaves coming right off the trunks, handily, so I can show you. You can see they have these little bit of a jagged edge, and obviously there are no flowers down here to show you. But this is also handy because here I can show you the sapsucker holes. Sapsuckers love these for whatever reason. They dig all their holes in rings, and sometimes eventually they drill so many holes they actually kill the tree. But this one's been here for quite a while. Hopefully it survives. And yeah, now let's go to another white flowering tree that some people may mistake for this, but it's actually a shrub and very, very different. Follow me. So this is a red elder. Also attracts pileated woodpeckers especially, who come and eat the red berries. So similarly to the mountain ash, it has red berries too. It also has white flowers. If you look up here, you'll see first a bunch of these that are developing their berries, and just above some remains of one of the younger little flower stems there. Mostly these are finished blooming for the year. They were all covered in white flowers. Now they're slowly developing their berries. Some people believe that you can harvest these to make elderflower and elderberry things. I don't, because my understanding is that there is far too much hydrocyanic acid in these, which basically becomes cyanide in your body, which you don't want. You know, apple seeds have cyanide in them also. Apple trees do. Not enough that it will kill you unless you extracted so much from the seeds that you could actually poison yourself. But I just don't think it's healthy. And these have, my understanding is, more. It's kind of a large shrub. You see them all over the place. But it is different from the black elder, which is the European one that is normally used for elderberry syrup, elderflower water, all of those things. So personally, I wouldn't recommend using it, but I have heard of people who do. And the pileated woodpeckers certainly eat the berries in the fall. But my body's not the same as woodpeckers, so I don't. But yeah, red elder, they're all over the place. Oh, and they have similar sort of arrangement of leaves, if you look at these, to the mountain ash. How can I show you? But the leaves are a very different shape, so they're much bigger. They are serrated, but the serrations are much smaller compared to the size of the leaf. So here we are at the dogwood. The Pacific dogwood, like so many other plants and trees around, is having a fabulous blossoming year this year. And you can see each of those, it looks like a 4-petaled white flower. Actually, if you look very close, the flower is in the middle of those 4 big white leaves. And it's a bunch of flowers, actually. It's a whole little cluster of little buds that open into tiny little pointy flowers. So that's the Pacific dogwood. And you'll see them around, varying sizes. Some people have them in their gardens, but they are wild, indigenous here. So yeah, now I'm going to show you a red osier dogwood, which is entirely different. So this is a red osier dogwood, which you can see the leaves are similar to dogwoods, but the flowers are quite different. At the moment, they look similar to the middle part of the Pacific dogwood, which is its little collection of tiny buds, which is what this has here. But they don't have those big 4 white leaves to show you each one. And they have these red branches also. And they grow in marshes or swamps or on the edge of water, as far as I know. So yes. We interrupt this video about trees to show you an alligator lizard, because you never know where you might find them. Well, actually you do. They're usually on a dry bank. Goodbye. So up behind me is a ponderosa pine. Just for some perspective, ponderosas are different from lodgepoles. I mean, that's not the only 2 types we have. We have shore pines also on the rocks of the shores, especially of this island. But this one, ponderosas have longer needles. I would say they're maybe 1.5 to 2 times the length of a lodgepole pine needle. But it's still a pine tree. It has many similar characteristics, needles in little groups. Just instead of like firs have them all along a branch, pines have sort of tufts of needles, little clumps. So yeah. Okay, so to conclude today, arbutus trees. I actually thought we would go somewhere off my property for this video, and in the end there were way too many trees. We haven't even covered half of them. But that's the way it is. So we're still here. Now I'm on my roof with this arbutus that grows from down beside the house down there, and hopefully you can see that the arbutus also are blooming right now. Arbutus have in our area some kind of virus or blight that is killing them off. We don't know why ours seem to die a little bit back every year. It might be the virus, it might be their natural dieback. You see their leaves turn black and then they get new leaves every year. Hopefully ours make it. Meanwhile, that's it for today. I have harvested my dinner. Yet another flower that's in season right now. Cauliflower. Oops. And yeah, so I'm going to make my dinner. Happy exploring. I will see you next time.